Mr. Luis wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against the mop handle, his back aching from another long day of cleaning the school hallways. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, and the faint echo of students' laughter from earlier in the day still seemed to hang in the building. This was his life, a life of quiet labor, often unseen but deeply appreciated by those who truly knew him. Luis was more than just a janitor. He was the heart of the school. His warm smile greeted everyone who walked through the doors, and his willingness to help with anything, whether it was fixing a broken locker or encouraging a struggling student, was what made him beloved. Despite his cheerful demeanor, life wasn't easy for Mr. Luis. As a single father raising two young children, every day felt like a balancing act. His morning started early, making breakfast and ensuring his kids had everything they needed for school. Then he'd head to work, spending hours scrubbing floors, repairing broken desks, and setting up for school events. By the time he got home, he was too exhausted to do much more than help his kids with their homework and tuck them into bed. His car, a battered old sedan, was a constant source of stress. It broke down more often than it ran smoothly, leaving him stranded on the side of the road far too many times. He had patched it up countless times, pouring what little savings he had into repairs. But the vehicle seemed determined to give up on him entirely. Still, Luis never complained. He couldn't afford to. His children depended on him, and he would do whatever it took to keep their lives stable. One day, as Luis was repairing a locker for a frustrated student, the boy looked up at him and said, "Mr. Luis, why are you always so nice to everyone?" Luis chuckled softly and replied, "Because a little kindness can go a long way. You never know who might need it the most." Those words weren't just a saying for him. They were the philosophy he lived by. It didn't matter that his own life was full of challenges. He believed in being a source of light for others, even when his own world felt dark. There were nights when Luis sat alone in his small kitchen, staring at the stack of bills he couldn't quite pay off, wondering how he would make it through the next month. But then he'd think about his kids, their smiles, their laughter, and remind himself that every sacrifice was worth it. He wasn't just working to keep the school clean. He was working to give his children a chance at a better life, one he never had. Despite everything, Luis found joy in the little moments. A thank you from a teacher, a wave from a student, or a parent who stopped to tell him how much they appreciated his work. These small gestures kept him going, reminding him that his efforts didn't go unnoticed. He may have been struggling, but to those around him, Luis was a hero. Little did he know, someone had been watching, and his life was about to change in a way he could never have imagined. Barron Trump stepped out of his black SUV, his polished shoes meeting the worn asphalt of the high school parking lot. The morning was crisp, the air filled with the chatter of students hurrying to class. This wasn't a high-profile visit. It was deliberately low-key, meant to be an intimate speaking engagement with the students. Barron, now in his 20s, had grown accustomed to life in the spotlight, but preferred to keep things understated when it came to connecting with people. As he made his way into the building, a small commotion near the lockers caught his attention. A middle-aged man in a faded uniform was crouched down, gently guiding a nervous student whose locker had jammed shut. The man's movements were calm, deliberate, and kind, as though fixing a student's problem wasn't just part of his job but a personal responsibility. Barron slowed his pace, observing the interaction. The student thanked him, their face breaking into a relieved smile. And the man, Mr. Luis, as the name on his badge read, responded with a warm laugh. "Any time, kiddo. You've got enough to stress about without worrying about this old locker." Barron stood there for a moment, captivated. There was something about Mr. Luis that struck him. A humility, a quiet strength. As the janitor gathered his tools and moved on, Barron followed, watching as Luis stopped to greet teachers and students alike. Everyone seemed to know him, and more importantly, everyone seemed to care about him. The interactions weren't forced. They were genuine, built on years of trust and kindness. Later, as Barron sat in the staff lounge preparing for his speech, he overheard two teachers chatting nearby. "I don't know how Luis does it," one said. "He's here before dawn, stays late, and never complains, even with everything he's going through." "Yeah," the other replied, her voice tinged with sympathy. "That car of his is falling apart, and he's walking to work half the time now. But he's too proud to ask for help." Barron's mind lingered on those words, too proud to ask for help. He couldn't stop picturing the man he had seen earlier, patiently fixing a locker, smiling as though the weight of his world didn't exist. It was a stark contrast to his own life. Barron had never needed to ask for help. It was always there, readily available. He thought about the luxuries he took for granted, his education, his resources, the freedom to pursue his passions without the constant worry of survival. That night, Barron couldn't shake the image of Mr. Luis. He imagined him walking home after a long day, shoulders heavy, his body tired but his spirit unbroken. For the first time in a long while, Barron felt a deep sense of responsibility. Luis's struggles weren't unique, but they were a reminder of the countless people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, unseen and underappreciated. As Barron sat in his car, staring out at the school parking lot where Luis's battered sedan sat barely holding together, a quiet determination settled over him. He couldn't fix all the injustices in the world, but he could do something here, now, for someone who truly deserved it. For the first time that day, Barron smiled, not out of obligation or politeness, but because he knew what he had to do. The school hallways were quiet now, the buzz of the day replaced by the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Barron lingered near the front office, his speech long finished, but something held him back. His gaze wandered down the empty corridors, and that's when he saw him, Mr. Luis, methodically making his evening rounds. A garbage bag slung over one shoulder, a mop bucket trailing behind him. Luis moved with the same calm diligence Barron had noticed earlier. There was no audience now, no students to impress or staff to acknowledge his efforts. Yet Luis worked with the same dedication, carefully wiping down desks, sweeping corners most wouldn't bother with, and ensuring every detail was tended to. Barron watched from a distance, his chest tightening as he noticed the fatigue etched into Luis's posture. It wasn't just the physical toll of the job. It was the weight of a life spent giving endlessly to others, often with little in return. As Barron followed him quietly down the hall, he noticed how Luis paused every so often to straighten a student's forgotten jacket or adjust a poster peeling off the wall. He even stopped to pick up a crumpled piece of paper from the floor, muttering something about how every small effort matters. There was no bitterness in his actions, only a quiet pride in doing things right. The real turning point came later, as Barron made his way out to the parking lot. The sun had set, leaving the area dimly lit by flickering streetlights. Luis stood near his old sedan, its faded paint and dented body speaking of years of wear. Barron stopped in his tracks, watching as Luis climbed into the driver's seat and tried to start the engine. The car groaned, sputtered, and fell silent. Luis tried again, and again. Each attempt was met with the same agonizing result. Barron could see the frustration building in Luis's expression. The man rested his forehead against the steering wheel for a moment before stepping out, opening the hood and fumbling with the engine. His movements were tired but determined, as if sheer willpower alone could coax life back into the battered vehicle. Minutes passed, and it became clear the car wasn't going anywhere. Luis let out a resigned sigh, his shoulders slumping as he closed the hood and gathered his belongings. What struck Barron most wasn't the defeat in Luis's movements, but the quiet dignity he carried, even in this moment. There was no outburst, no visible anger, just a man accepting another setback in a long line of them. Luis adjusted his bag over his shoulder and began the walk home, his figure growing smaller as he disappeared into the night. Barron remained rooted to the spot, a lump forming in his throat. He couldn't look away from the empty parking space where Luis's car sat, lifeless and broken. In that moment, Barron made up his mind. This wasn't something he could ignore. Luis didn't deserve this struggle. He deserved recognition, respect, and more than anything, a break. Barron climbed back into his SUV, his mind already racing with plans. He wasn't just going to offer Luis a hand. He was going to change his life. As he drove away, his heart felt heavier yet more purposeful than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, Barron knew he was about to do something that truly mattered. The next morning, Barron walked into the school's front office with a quiet determination. He had already made up his mind, but now came the part where he would need others' help to execute his plan. The principal, A warm and approachable woman listened intently as Barron explained what he wanted to do for Mr. Luis. Her expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment, and finally to one of heartfelt agreement. "This is incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Luis deserves this more than anyone. Let's make it happen." The plan came together quickly. The staff and even a few students were brought into the secret, all of them pledging to keep it under wraps. The excitement in their faces mirrored Barron's own growing anticipation. Arrangements were made for a brand new SUV to be delivered to the school parking lot, complete with a large red bow on the hood. Barron insisted on including a handwritten note as well, a message that would remind Luis how much he was valued, not just for his hard work, but for the kindness and compassion he brought to the school every single day. On the day of the surprise, the tension was palpable. Teachers and students tried their best to act normal, but there was a buzz in the air, an unspoken excitement that hinted at something extraordinary about to unfold. Luis, oblivious to it all, went about his day with his usual smile, offering help to anyone who needed it and chatting with students in the hallways. When the moment arrived, the principal called Luis to the parking lot under the guise of an urgent staff meeting. He hesitated, wiping his hands on his uniform before making his way outside, his tired steps reflecting another long day. As he walked out the double doors, the sight before him stopped him in his tracks. There, gleaming under the midday sun, was a brand new SUV. The red bow tied neatly on the hood glimmered brightly, and the gathered staff and students stood in a semicircle, their faces alight with anticipation. For a moment, Luis didn't understand. He blinked, looking at the car, then at the crowd, then back at the car, confusion and disbelief written all over his face. Barron stepped forward, holding out a set of keys. "This is for you, Mr. Luis," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything you do. You're the heart of this school, and you deserve so much more than this." Luis's hands trembled as he took the keys, his eyes filling with tears. He looked at Barron, his voice shaking. I don't even know what to say. This can't be real." "It's real," Barron replied, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've given so much to everyone here. It's time someone gave something back to you." The crowd erupted into applause as Luis stood there, overwhelmed by the moment. His tears flowed freely now, and he clutched the keys to his chest as if afraid they might disappear. "Thank you," he whispered, over and over again, his voice breaking with every word. "Thank you so much." The staff and students cheered, some wiping their own tears as they watched the man who had always put others first finally receive the recognition and kindness he deserved. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. And for Luis, it was a day that would forever change his life. Luis stepped out into the sunlight, his brow furrowed in confusion as he glanced at the crowd of staff and students gathered in the parking lot. The principal stood near the front, gesturing for him to come closer. He hesitated, clutching his worn cleaning rag in his hand, unsure of what could warrant such an unusual assembly. As he walked closer, his eyes landed on the SUV parked in the center of the group. It gleamed in the sunlight, a brand new vehicle with a bright red bow tied neatly on the hood. Luis stopped abruptly, his feet rooted to the ground. He blinked, shaking his head slightly as if trying to dispel the surreal image before him. "This can't be real," he whispered under his breath, his voice barely audible. He turned to the principal. Confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" The principal smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Luis, we wanted to show you how much you mean to us, how much you've done for everyone here. Someone very special has made this possible." Luis's gaze shifted, and Barron stepped forward from the crowd, holding a set of keys in his hand. The moment their eyes met, something inside Luis broke free. Barron walked up to him, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Mr. Luis," he said softly, "this is for you. You've given so much to everyone here. It's time someone gave something back to you." The keys sparkled in the sunlight as Barron extended them toward Luis. For a moment, Luis couldn't move. His hands trembled, and he felt the world around him blur. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the keys as if afraid they might disappear if he touched them. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over as he finally grasped the keys. His voice cracked as he tried to speak, but all that came out were broken whispers. I don't, I don't deserve this, he said, his words tumbling out in disbelief. I've just, I've just been doing my job. Barron placed a firm yet gentle hand on his shoulder. You deserve this and so much more, he replied, his tone unwavering. You've been a light in this school, a role model for everyone here. This is just a small thank you for everything you've done. Luis's tears came in full force then, and his knees buckled slightly as he pressed a hand to his chest. Thank you, he whispered, his voice trembling. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me, to my kids. The crowd erupted into applause, a thunderous sound that echoed across the parking lot. Some of the students wiped tears from their faces, while others cheered loudly, their admiration for Luis pouring out in waves. Teachers hugged one another, their hearts full at seeing a man so deserving finally receive the recognition he had long earned. Luis turned to the SUV, his eyes wide as he took in every detail. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the door handle, the smooth surface reflecting his astonished face. He looked back at Barron, who smiled warmly, his own eyes misty with emotion. I'll never forget this, Luis said, his voice breaking again. You've changed my life. You've given me hope. And as Luis opened the door to his new SUV, the crowd erupted once more, their cheers and applause filling the air. It was a moment of pure, raw humanity, a moment that would stay with everyone there forever. The moment Barron handed the keys to Mr. Luis was only the beginning of something far greater. By the end of the day, whispers of the heartfelt gesture had turned into a buzz that spread through the town. Within hours, a teacher posted a video of Luis's emotional reaction on social media, captioned, "Kindness changes everything." Barron Trump just changed the life of the man who changes lives for all of us every day. The video gained traction almost immediately. By the next morning, it had gone viral. People from all corners of the country shared it, commenting on the purity of the moment. The tears streaming down Luis's face, the unwavering sincerity in Barron's voice, the cheers of the students and staff who had witnessed the act of kindness firsthand. It wasn't just a story about generosity. It was a reminder of the power of compassion, and it touched hearts in ways no one could have anticipated. Messages began pouring in from strangers. Some offered additional support for Luis and his family, from gift cards for groceries to free car maintenance for the SUV. Others reached out to Barron, commending him for his selfless act and sharing their own stories of people who had made a difference in their lives. This reminds me of the teacher who paid for my lunch every day when I couldn't afford it, one person wrote. Sometimes, small acts of kindness can mean the world to someone. Meanwhile, Luis was still coming to terms with what had happened. Sitting in his modest kitchen that evening, he watched his children climb into the SUV parked outside, their laughter filling the air as they explored every inch of it. For the first time in years, Luis felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He didn't have to worry about his car breaking down on the way to work, or missing important moments in his children's lives because he had to walk home. This vehicle wasn't just transportation, it was freedom. For Luis, the impact went beyond practicality. The SUV represented something deeper: acknowledgement. For years, he had poured himself into his work without expecting anything in return. To be seen, to be appreciated in such a profound way, made him feel valued in ways he couldn't put into words. It wasn't just about what the gift was, it was about what it meant. As the story gained momentum, it sparked conversations across social media, news outlets, and even local schools about the importance of kindness and community. Teachers used the story as a lesson, asking students to reflect on how small gestures could create ripple effects of positivity. Families sat together, watching the video and discussing the importance of gratitude and giving back. Barron, for his part, stayed quiet about the event. When reporters reached out, he simply said, "This was never about me. It was about Mr. Luis and the incredible impact he has on everyone around him. I just wanted him to know that his kindness hasn't gone unnoticed." For Luis, life began to change in ways he hadn't thought possible. He had always been the one helping others, but now he found himself surrounded by a community eager to give back to him. And for those who heard his story, it wasn't just an inspiring tale. It was a call to action, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could transform lives. Weeks had passed since the unforgettable day when Mr. Luis stood in the school parking lot, clutching the keys to his new SUV with tears streaming down his face. Life for Luis had begun to take on a new rhythm, one that felt lighter, freer, and filled with possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine before. Yet what struck him most wasn't the car itself, but the genuine kindness that had set everything into motion. Barron had kept in touch with Luis in the days that followed. It wasn't through grand gestures or public displays, but quiet, thoughtful moments. He would send Luis messages now and then, asking how he and his kids were doing, or checking if they needed anything else. Barron wasn't looking for acknowledgement. His gestures were born from an earnest desire to see Luis thrive. In these small exchanges, Luis felt a connection he hadn't known he was missing, a sense that someone truly cared. One Saturday afternoon, Luis decided to take his children to the park, a simple outing, yet one that had become far easier thanks to the SUV. As he drove, the sound of his children's laughter filled the air. The once constant worry of whether his car would make it was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The SUV wasn't just a means of transportation, it was a symbol of hope, a bridge between his struggles and a brighter future. As they pulled into the park, his youngest daughter squealed with delight, pointing to the swings. Luis chuckled, his heart swelling with happiness as he parked the car. Watching his children race toward the playground, he took a moment to sit back and reflect. The weight he had carried for years, the late nights, the financial worries, the quiet moments of self-doubt, seemed to have lifted. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, to feel proud of the life he had built for his children despite the odds. Unbeknownst to Luis, Barron had stopped by the park that day, standing at a distance. Dressed simply, blending into the crowd, Barron watched the scene unfold. He saw Luis push his daughter on the swing, her laughter echoing across the park. He watched as his son begged Luis to join him on the jungle gym, and Luis, with the same tireless energy he brought to his work, climbed up to indulge his son's request. Barron felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. This wasn't about the applause or the viral video anymore. It was about this moment, this simple, beautiful moment where a man who had given so much finally had the chance to receive. Barron smiled to himself, slipping away unnoticed, content in the knowledge that his gesture had made a lasting difference. As Luis drove home with his children that evening, their sleepy heads resting against the car windows, he whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, not just for the car, but for the kindness that had reminded him he wasn't invisible. His life had been changed by a single act, but more than that, his spirit had been renewed. And as he looked at his children, he promised himself he would continue to pass that kindness on, knowing that even the smallest gestures could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. If this story touched your heart, let it inspire you to look around and see who you can uplift. Small acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives forever. Have you ever witnessed or been part of a moment that restored your faith in humanity? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Together we can spread hope, kindness, and positivity one story at a time.